You are listening to SRM Insider. This is the Cyber Intelligence Briefing, your weekly roundup of the latest cybersecurity news and insights, straight from SRM's leading global incident response team. Welcome to SRM's Cyber Intelligence Briefing. I'm Kyle Schwebler, and I'm joined by my colleagues Miles Arkwright and James Teitler.
Thanks, Kyle. Happy Halloween to all our listeners.
Hi, everyone.
Well, we're covering 6 stories this week. We'll discuss LockBit's claim to have breached American aerospace giant Boeing. We'll look at a major ransomware attack on the Chilean telecoms company Grupo GTD. The ransomware group Hunters International have published sensitive medical photos in an aggressive extortion technique, and Russian state-backed hackers have been targeting French critical networks. Before we get to any of those stories, I thought it would be nice to kick things off with a bit of good news. Police in Nigeria and Spain have been active this past week dismantling multiple cybercrime operations. The Spanish police managed to arrest 34 scammers who were collectively responsible for stealing and monetizing data belonging to over 4 million people. These scammers, who are obviously financially motivated, have been carrying out various phishing attacks over email and SMS, usually impersonating delivery firms or utility providers in order to trick their victims into providing sensitive information. On some occasions, they even pretended to be a distressed family member to trick their victims into sending money. In a separate operation, the Nigerian police managed to arrest 6 individuals during a raid of a cybercrime syndicate, which was a hub for business email compromise attacks, as well as investment fraud and also romance fraud.
Yeah, it's great to see some law enforcement success against cyber criminals, but we do know that cyber criminals are highly opportunistic, and we can expect to see new groups crop up to fill the gaps that have been left. I know that we do touch on it quite a bit, but organizations must make sure their employees are aware of the different psychological tactics cyber criminals are using to trick their victims.
Yeah, and just to quickly go back to that Spanish operation, during that raid, the police also seized guns, cars, and cash. It just goes to show that these cybercrime syndicates are much more similar to traditional organized crime groups than what many may first think.
Absolutely. And separately, in September, we saw there was a surge in ransomware attacks based on the number of victims posted on dark web leak sites. So in September, a total of 462 individual victims were posted, which was a 20% increase from the previous month. The surge was partly driven by a new group calling themselves Lost Trust, who leaked data from 52 victims on a single day last month, but have not posted any new victims since. Ransomware veterans LockBit, on the other hand, were the most active group in September and also in October, while other groups have varied considerably in their activity from month to month.
And James, those are just the victims that we're able to track after they're posted publicly on leak sites, right? I'm sure there are a lot more victims out there whose name we never see because, they've negotiated and paid a ransom. But I must say, the percentage of incidents that we've seen that end up settling with a ransom payment has decreased consistently over the last few years.
And any idea as to why that is?
Yeah, a couple things, really. I think the primary driver is just the general awareness of the ransomware threat over the last few years, and that's meant that organizations have invested in critical controls, especially, I think, good backup processes. Having solid backups in a ransomware incident means that an organization is largely resilient to the encryption aspect and removes a lot of the reasons why they would ever engage in pay a ransom. And then secondly, I think that in general, organizations and the public really have become slightly immune to the issue of data breaches because it just, becomes so common. So the fallout from a data breach, especially reputationally, it might just not be what it was a few years ago.
I suppose there'll always be reasons why organizations would decide to pay a ransom.
Yeah, of course. I mean, especially if the data that's been stolen is particularly sensitive, think valuable intellectual property or sensitive health data, then organizations will often be tempted to try and avoid its public disclosure by paying a ransom.
Yeah, well, talking about that exact thing, last week the ransomware group Hunters International was seen to be using a particularly aggressive extortion tactic. They have uploaded to their dark web leak site pre-operation photos from a plastic surgery clinic in the US. And the group is believed to be a rebranding of the ransomware group Hive, which was taken down by a joint law enforcement operation in, I think, January this year.
Yeah, I think this story shows why it's so important to make sure that sensitive data is encrypted both at rest and in transit. Companies should also make sure that any data retention policies are carefully adhered to mitigate the risk of any old data being used for data extortion down the line. We've seen time and time again that these threat actors are really unscrupulous and will try anything they can do to ramp up the pressure.
Yeah, and separately, ANSSI, who are the French cybersecurity agency, has reported that since 2021, the Russian military intelligence hacking group, known either as APT28 or Fancy Bear, has been targeting sensitive French organizations, including government entities, businesses, and think tanks. And interestingly here, the group has been using various tactics to gain access and avoid detection, such as compromising routers, which are not being actively monitored.
Yeah, that's right. So in their report, ANSSI noted that APT28 has refrained from using potentially noisy tactics like installing backdoors on systems for command and control. So we know that nation-state hacking groups like this one are often a lot more stealthy and sophisticated than financially motivated hackers like ransomware groups. But this really shows why it's important to monitor any potentially neglected devices on the perimeter of your network and make sure that they're kept up to date with the latest patches. This is ultimately a great way to defend against all kinds of threat actors.
Yeah. In another ransomware story, the multinational telecommunications company Grupo GTD, which is headquartered in Chile, they confirmed that they suffered a ransomware attack last week. The incident apparently impacted various systems and forced Grupo GTD to shut down its infrastructure as a service platform, which caused further interruption. Both the telephone and television services it provides of the internet were also disrupted. The company disclosed the incident in a public statement within 2 days of it occurring. They actually explicitly called out the importance of proactive and clear communication with stakeholders during a cyber incident.
Yeah, I think this is a really great example of how preparing for cyber incidents extends beyond implementing technical controls or drafting instant response plans. Having that swept up public communications plan is vital when it comes to managing the reputational impact of a cyber incident. Having a clear understanding of who is responsible for leading public communications, when to engage with such communications, and lastly, what details to include to maintain transparency but not compromise, the necessary secrecy. These are some of the most important considerations for organizations to be aware of.
And finally, the prolific ransomware group LockBit has listed the American aerospace giant Boeing on their leak site. LockBit have set a tight deadline for Boeing to make contact. They've threatened to leak the data they have on the 2nd of November, giving the company only 6 days to respond. While details of the attack are sparse at the moment, LockBit have allegedly told a security researcher that the affiliate who carried out the attack has used an unspecified zero-day exploit. Boeing stated on Friday that they were investigating the claims.
Yeah, if LockBit's claims are true, this would be one of the group's largest victims to date. Last month, LockBit said it was pressuring affiliates to start asking for a 3% of their victims' annual revenue as a ransom. Given Boeing's annual revenue last year was over $66 billion, this ransom demand could be extremely large.
Yeah, organizations often fall victim to aggressive pressure tactics during these stressful situations. Having that understanding that this is a technique used by threat actors and factoring it into any instant response testings are some of the initial steps organizations can take when preparing themselves for this scenario.
Agreed. But just to be clear here, Miles, I think that it is highly unlikely that LockBit would ever realistically think that they'd be able to demand a ransom equal to 3% of Boeing's revenue. But I have no doubt any demand here will be significant. Well, that brings us to an end of this week's episode. Please join us again next week. And as always, you can access a written version of this briefing on our website.
Thanks, Carl. Goodbye.
Until next week, goodbye.